we think we know so much. We have satellites that see the whole planet. We have microscopes that see the building blocks of life. We have equations that describe the movement of galaxies. We look at the past, at the medieval world, and we see superstition. So we see ignorance. We see a world lit only by fire and faith. A French historian, Marc Bloch, wrote in his book Feudal Society that the medieval mind was accustomed to the miraculous. It wasn't a surprise. It was just how the world worked. But what if they saw something we don't? They didn't see a world of atoms and gravity and DNA. They saw a world of symbols, a world of meaning. They believed a story was written into the leaves of every tree, the song of every bird, the light of every star. They thought nature was a book, and God was the author. Did they get the science wrong? Almost, always. But did they find a kind of beauty, a kind of connection that we've lost? Did their world, full of griffins and screaming mandrakes, feel more alive than ours? Maybe their beliefs weren't just mistakes. Maybe they were poems. Number 22, could a rock grow? To us, a rock is a dead thing. It is a collection of minerals forged by heat and pressure over millions of years. It sits, it erodes, that's it. But in the medieval mind, the line between living and non-living was not so clear. They saw a world of constant transformation, and they believed that even stones and metals grew deep within the earth. This wasn't just a fantasy, it was a logical conclusion from what they saw. They saw veins of gold and silver in the rock. They looked like roots of a tree. They saw crystals forming in caves, seemingly from nothing. They looked like they were growing. The great Persian physician and philosopher Avicenna, whose work was hugely influential in Europe by the 12th century, wrote about the formation of minerals. He argued they were formed from a mixture of sulfur and mercury. Not the elements we know today, but philosophical principles. Sulfur was the principle of fire and dryness. Mercury was the principle of water and fluidity. Depending on their purity and how they mixed in the Earth's womb, they would slowly mature into different metals. And lead was an immature metal. Gold was the most perfect, mature metal. The Earth itself was an alchemical laboratory, slowly perfecting its own substance. This idea animated the entire practice of alchemy. Alchemists didn't believe they were creating gold from nothing. They believed they were speeding up a natural process. They were taking an immature metal like lead and helping it reach its natural final state gold. This is what the famous alchemical text, the Emerald Tablet, hints at when it says, "Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon, the wind carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse." The earth was a nursery for metals. Albertus Magnus, a 13th century German Dominican friar and philosopher, wrote extensively on mineralogy in his work De Mineralibus. He accepted the idea that metals grew from vapors in the earth, and he even tried to classify stones based on their perceived properties and powers, not just their physical makeup. The beauty here is profound. It means the entire planet is alive. The ground beneath your feet is not dead dirt. It is a slow, powerful, living thing, constantly working, constantly growing. The mountains aren't just heaps of stone. They are ancient, slow-breathing organisms. Every gold ring, every silver coin was once a seed in the earth, slowly ripening. This belief dissolves the hard line we draw between biology and geology. It turns the entire world into a single, interconnected organism. We see resources to be extracted. They saw a garden to be understood. We mine the earth. They thought they were harvesting it. But what do we really know about the deep earth? We've drilled only a few miles down. The deepest hole, the Kola super deep borehole in Russia, only went about 7.5 miles. The Earth's radius is nearly 4,000 miles. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about what lies beneath our own feet. We talk about extremophiles, bacteria that live in volcanic vents and solid rock. Is that a form of life within the stone itself? What if the slow geological processes of plate tectonics and mantle convection are a kind of planetary metabolism we are just too fast to perceive? What if rocks don't grow, but the planet as a whole behaves as a single, living system, as the Gaia hypothesis proposed by James Lovelock in the 1970s suggests? Number 21. Did the world have a soul? We see the world as a machine. A complex, beautiful machine, but a machine nonetheless. It operates on physical laws. Gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics. There is no ghost in the machine. But the medieval world saw it differently. They looked at the order, the cycles, the sheer vitality of the world, and they concluded it must have a soul. Just like a person. This idea came from the ancient Greeks, particularly Plato. In his dialogue, Timaeus, Plato describes the creation of the universe. The creator, or demiurge, crafts the cosmos as a single living creature. He gives it a body, which is the physical world, and a soul, the anima mundi, or world soul. This soul was thought to be the source of all life, motion, and order in the universe. It wasn't a personified God living in the sky. It was an immanent, pervasive intelligence woven into the fabric of reality itself. This concept was eagerly adopted by medieval thinkers, especially those in the 12th century Renaissance. Philosophers at the school of Chartres like Bernardus Silvestris and William of Conches saw the anima mundi as a way to understand how a transcendent God could interact with the material world. The world soul was the intermediary. It was the vital force that guided the growth of plants, the orbits of the planets, the instincts of animals. When a seed sprouted, it was the anima mundi at work. When the seasons changed, it was the world soul breathing. This belief is beautiful because it makes the world a conscious, coherent whole. It isn't a random collection of objects and forces. It's a single living being, and we are a part of it. Every river is a vein. Every force is a lung. The wind is its breath. This worldview encourages a deep sense of reverence and participation. You aren't just living on the earth. You are living in a vast, intelligent being. It implies that everything is connected not just by physical laws, but by a shared life force. The 12th century German abbess and mystic Hildegard of Bingen expressed a similar idea in her concept of viriditas, or greening power. For her, this was the divine force of life itself, a moisture-filled greening energy that flowed through every plant, animal, and person. It was the soul of the world made manifest in its life. We've dismissed this idea as primitive pantheism. But have we fully replaced it? Quantum physics tells us that at the most fundamental level, particles are interconnected in ways that defy our classical understanding. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which Einstein called spooky action at a distance, shows that two particles can be linked, instantly affecting each other no matter how far apart they are. Is this a faint echo of a connected, unified reality? Biologists talk about the wood wide web, the vast underground network of fungi that connects trees in a forest, allowing them to share nutrients and information. Is this a localized biological version of a world soul? What if consciousness is not something that arises only in complex brains, but is a fundamental property of the universe itself, as some panpsychist philosophers now argue? Number 20. Was the unicorn a real animal? The unicorn is a symbol of fantasy, a creature for fairy tales. But for centuries, people in the medieval world believed it was a real living animal. It wasn't a magical beast from another dimension. It was just a rare, wild creature that lived in the forests of India or Ethiopia. Its description was surprisingly consistent. It was written about by the Greek physician Ctesias in the 4th century BCE, and later by the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder in his Natural History. They described a wild ass the size of a horse with a white body, a dark red head, and blue eyes. And, of course, a single horn on its forehead, about 1.5 feet long. This horn was the important part. It was said that drinking from a unicorn's horn would protect you from poison, stomach trouble, and epilepsy. The creature itself was incredibly fast and impossible to capture. The only way to catch it was to leave a virgin maiden in the forest. The unicorn, drawn to her purity, would come and lay its head in her lap, and then hunters could capture it. This belief was recorded in every medieval bestiary, the illustrated books that described animals and their moral lessons. The Aberdeen Bestiary, a beautiful 12th century manuscript, has a detailed entry and illustration of the unicorn. For the medieval mind, the story of the unicorn was a powerful allegory for Christ. The unicorn was Christ, fierce and untamable by the forces of the world. The horn represented the unity of God. The virgin was the Virgin Mary. The hunters were the people who crucified Jesus. The animal wasn't just an animal, it was a living symbol of the central story of their faith, walking the earth. The trade-in unicorn horn, or alicorn, was very real and very lucrative. Powdered alicorn was a prized medicine for the wealthy. Of course, what was being sold was usually the tusk of a narwhal, the unicorn of the sea, or sometimes rhino horn, or even elephant tusk. The famous unicorn horn of the throne chair of Denmark, used for coronations from the 17th to the 19th century, is made of narwhal tusks. People believed in it because the evidence, the horns, seemed to exist. The beauty of this belief is in how it wove together the mundane and the miraculous. A real animal living in a real place could also be a perfect symbol of God. And nature wasn't just a collection of species, it was a library of divine metaphors. The unicorn's existence meant that purity and power were real forces in the world, embodied in flesh and blood. It meant that the wild, untamed parts of the world held secrets and sacredness. It made the world more dangerous, but also more wondrous. We have cataloged every species. We've mapped every corner of the globe. There are no more unicorns to find. We've traded mystery for certainty, but have we? We are still discovering new species all the time, especially in the deep sea. There are creatures that look more alien than any medieval monster. Is it possible that ancient accounts of strange animals were not pure fantasy, but garbled descriptions of real animals we haven't yet identified or that have since gone extinct? The rhinoceros with its single horn and tough hide was certainly one source for the legend. But what else might have been seen, and what does our own modern obsession with finding life on other planets say about us? Are we just searching for a new cosmic unicorn, a creature that will prove the universe is not as empty and meaningless as it sometimes seems? Number 19, does a plant's shape reveal its purpose? Imagine you're a medieval physician. You have no chemistry, no microscopes. A patient comes to you with a liver ailment. How do you decide what to prescribe? You might go out into the fields and look for a plant with a liver-shaped leaf. This was the logic behind something called the doctrine of signatures. The idea was simple and elegant. God, in his infinite wisdom, did not want humanity to suffer. So he placed clues, or signatures, in the natural world to show us the purpose of things. A plant's appearance, the shape of its leaves, the color of its flowers, the form of its roots, was a divine signpost pointing to its use. The Swiss alchemist and physician Paracelsus was one of the most famous proponents of this idea in the 16th century, but its roots are much older, extending back into folk medicine for centuries. The examples are fascinating. The walnut, with its hard shell like a skull and its kernel shaped like a brain, was obviously meant to treat head ailments. Eyebright, a small flower with markings that look like a bloodshot eye, was used for eye infections. The lungwort, whose spotted leaves were thought to resemble a diseased lung, was used for respiratory problems. The red sappy juice of bloodroot was used for blood disorders. It was a visual, intuitive form of medicine. Nature was a pharmacy, and the plants themselves were the labels on the bottles. This is a beautiful idea because it suggests a benevolent and communicative universe. The world isn't silent or indifferent. It is actively trying to help us. It speaks to us, not in words, but in shapes, colors, and forms. To be a doctor or an herbalist was to be a reader of this divine text. It required a deep, quiet observation of the natural world. You had to look, really look, at a plant and see not just its biology, but its meaning. It fostered a relationship with nature built on attention and reverence. The 17th century herbalist William Coles wrote in his book The Art of Simpling, "The mercy of God maketh herbes for the use of men, and hath not only stamped upon them a distinct form, but also given them particular signatures, whereby a man may read the use of them." Of course, this is not how medicine works. The shape of a walnut is a coincidence. Sometimes the doctrine got it right by accident. Willow bark, for instance, which grows in damp places, was used for the aches and fevers associated with dampness like arthritis, and we now know it contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin. But mostly it was wrong. Yet, have we lost something by replacing this poetic system with a purely chemical one? We now know that plants are complex chemical factories, but the idea that their form has no meaning at all feels like a kind of blindness. Why do plants have the shapes they do? The principles of fractal geometry show that the branching patterns of trees, ferns, and river deltas follow similar mathematical rules. Is this a kind of signature, a mathematical language written into the world that we are only now learning to read? Does the aesthetic beauty we perceive in a flower symmetry or a leaf's veins have a deeper function we don't yet understand? Number 18. What if the universe was singing a song? We think of space as silent, a cold, empty vacuum. But the medieval world was convinced it was filled with music. A perfect divine harmony produced by the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. They called it the music of the spheres. This belief originated with the ancient Greek mathematician Pythagoras in the 6th century BCE. The story goes that he was passing a blacksmith shop and heard the pleasing harmony of hammers striking an anvil. He discovered that the different tones were related by simple mathematical ratios. He applied this same logic to the heavens. The planets moving in their orbits must also be governed by these perfect ratios. Each planet, fixed to a crystalline sphere revolving around the Earth, produced a unique note based on its speed and distance. And together, they created a constant celestial symphony. This idea was carried through Plato and Aristotle and was codified for the Middle Ages by the Roman philosopher Boethius in the 6th century in his work De Institutione Musica. Boethius explained that there were three kinds of music. Musica instrumentalis was the audible music we make with voices and instruments. Musica humana was the harmony of the human body and soul, the balance of our physical and spiritual selves. But the highest form was musica mundana, the music of the universe itself. We couldn't hear this cosmic music, he argued, not because it was too faint, but because it had been playing constantly since we were born. It was the background sound of existence itself, and we had become deaf to it. This is a breathtakingly beautiful concept. It means the universe is not a silent, random void. It is a piece of music. It is an ordered, rational, and deeply aesthetic creation. God was not just a watchmaker, he was a composer. Astronomy, mathematics, music, and theology were all intertwined. To study the stars was to study the score of God's symphony. This belief gave humanity a sense of place in a cosmos that was fundamentally ordered and beautiful. As Shakespeare later wrote in The Merchant of Venice, there's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst in, but in his motion like an angel sings. We now know the geocentric model is wrong. Planets don't ride on crystalline spheres, and space is a vacuum where sound, as we know it, cannot travel. But have we entirely lost the music? In 2012, scientists at CERN's Large Hadron Collider discovered the Higgs boson, and physicists used sonification to turn the data of its decay into audible sounds. We use radio telescopes to listen to the sounds of pulsars and distant galaxies. In 2016, LIGO detected gravitational waves for the first time, ripples in the fabric of space-time itself, caused by the collision of two black holes. They converted the signal into a sound, a tiny chirp, that was the echo of a cataclysmic cosmic event. Are we, in our own way, just now building the instruments capable of hearing the real music of the spheres? What if the fundamental constants of physics, the precise values that make our universe possible, are the notes that set the harmony for all of existence? Is string theory, with its idea that all particles are just vibrations of tiny strings, a new kind of Pythagoreanism for the 21st century? Number 17 was the air full of spirits. Today, we think of the air as mostly nitrogen and oxygen. It's a physical substance, a gas. But in the medieval world, the air was not empty. It was crowded. It was filled with invisible beings, angels, demons, and spirits of nature. This belief was a fusion of Christian theology and older pre-Christian folklore. The Bible talks about angels as messengers of God and demons as fallen angels led by Satan, the prince of the power of the air. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas, in his 13th century Summa Theologica, developed a complex angelology describing hierarchies of angels and their roles in the universe. They were real beings, just without physical bodies who could influence human affairs and the natural world. At the same time, folk traditions held on to beliefs in fairies, elves, and nature spirits that inhabited forests, rivers, and mountains. These two systems blended together. A sudden storm might be the work of demons. A feeling of peace in a beautiful grove might be the presence of an angel or a benevolent nature spirit. The world was not just a physical place, it was a spiritual battleground. The air thrummed with the constant activity of these invisible forces. People used bells in church towers not just to call people to prayer, but because the sound was believed to drive away evil spirits from the air. Incense wasn't just for fragrance, it was to purify the air and make it pleasing to angels. A sneeze was dangerous because it was thought you might accidentally expel your soul or let an evil spirit in, which is why people said, "God bless you." This worldview meant that human life was lived in the constant presence of the supernatural. Your thoughts, your health, the weather, all could be influenced by these unseen inhabitants of the air. The beauty of this is that it made the world intensely personal and morally charged. The invisible world was not remote, it was right here, all around you. This fostered a sense of caution, but also of wonder. A rainbow wasn't just refracted light, it might be a sign from God. A strange sound in the woods wasn't just the wind, it could be something else entirely. It meant you were never truly alone. This belief animated the landscape, giving every place a unique character and spiritual atmosphere. Some places felt holy, others felt cursed, because they were. The 14th century English mystic Julian of Norwich wrote of her visions of angels and demons, describing the spiritual reality as being more real and solid than the physical world she saw with her eyes. We have disinfected the air. We know about air pressure, weather fronts, and germs. We have explanations for everything, but have we explained it all away? We talk about the atmosphere of a place. We say a room has good vibes or bad energy. Are these just metaphors, or are we sensing something real that our scientific language can't yet describe? What is the real mechanism behind the placebo effect, where belief itself can cause physical healing? And what about the persistent cross-cultural reports of near-death experiences where people claim to have left their bodies and encountered beings of light? Are these just hallucinations of a dying brain, or a glimpse into a populated, invisible reality we inhabit every day without knowing it? Number 16. Can a pelican bring its children back from the dead? If you look at the carvings in an old medieval church, you might see a strange image, a large white bird, sitting on a nest, piercing its own breast with its beak, while its young feed on the blood flowing from the wound. This is the pelican, and according to the medieval bestiary, it was a symbol of Christ. The legend, which appears in early texts like the 2nd century Greek text known as the Physiologus, told a specific story. The mother pelican loves her children dearly, but as they grow, they begin to peck at her and strike her in the face. In a flash of anger, she strikes them back and kills them. After 3 days, overcome with grief and remorse, she pierces her own side and lets her blood pour over her dead chicks. The blood miraculously brings them back to life. For the medieval mind, the symbolism was immediate and powerful. The pelican was Jesus. Humanity, his children, had turned against him and through sin had killed themselves. But after 3 days, the pelican, Christ, wounded himself on the cross. His blood, shed for humanity, offers eternal life and resurrection to all who accept it. The story of the pelican was the story of the gospel, played out by a creature in the natural world. It was a living parable. Dante Alighieri, in his Paradiso, refers to St. John the Apostle as the one who lay upon the breast of our pelican. Queen Elizabeth I of England later adopted the image for herself, styling herself as the pelican, mother of her nation, willing to sacrifice for her people. This belief, of course, is biologically false. Pelicans do not kill their young and revive them with blood. The myth likely arose from a misunderstanding of their behavior. Pelicans have a large throat pouch, and they feed their young by regurgitating macerated fish into their mouths. From a distance, the red-tipped beak of some species pressing against its white breast feathers to empty the pouch might look like it was stabbing itself. But the factual error is not the point. The beauty of the belief is in its ability to see profound spiritual meaning in the simple actions of an animal. It connects the divine drama of salvation to the everyday workings of the natural world. It meant that every time you saw a pelican, you were being reminded of the central mystery of the Christian faith. Nature was a constant sermon, a constant source of theological reflection. We now understand evolution in animal behavior. We know the pelican acts out of instinct for the survival of its genes. We have stripped the world of these layers of meaning. But what have we replaced them with? We talk about altruism in animals, like a mother bird faking a broken wing to lead a predator away from her nest. Is this just a genetic program, or is there a kind of love, a kind of sacrifice that we are too arrogant to recognize? When we feel a sense of awe watching a nature documentary, are we just appreciating the mechanics of survival, or are we tapping into that older sense of wonder, the feeling that we are witnessing something more than just biology? Could the stories we tell about animals, even our modern scientific ones, still be a search for parables about ourselves? Number 15 was the Earth the center of everything. For over 1,400 years, the entire Western world believed something we now know is completely wrong. They believed the Earth was the fixed, unmoving center of the entire universe. And everything, the moon, the sun, the planets, the stars revolved around us. This was not a silly guess. It was a sophisticated scientific model, first developed by the ancient Greeks and given its final mathematical form by the astronomer Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD in his book, the Almagest. The Ptolemaic system was based on common sense observation. When you stand outside, the ground feels solid and still. The sun and moon and stars appear to move across the sky. It looks like we are at the center. To make the model work with the strange retrograde motions of planets like Mars, Ptolemy developed a complex system of epicyclic small circles on which the planets moved, which in turn moved on the larger circles of their orbits. It was complicated, but it worked. It could predict the positions of the planets with reasonable accuracy. The medieval world embraced this model completely. It fit perfectly with their theology. Humanity was God's special creation. The drama of sin and salvation was the most important story in the universe. Of course, the stage for this drama, the Earth, would be at the center of everything. Surrounding the Earth were the crystalline spheres of the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, or beyond. That was the sphere of the fixed stars. And beyond that was the empyrean heaven, the literal dwelling place of God and the angels. As Dante described in his Divine Comedy, the universe was a set of nested spheres, with Earth at the bottom and God at the top. To travel through space was to travel up a spiritual hierarchy. The beauty of the geocentric model is its sense of order and purpose. It gave humanity a clear place in the cosmos. We were central. The universe was arranged for us and around us. It was a finite, understandable, and deeply human-centered cosmos. Every star in the sky was part of a grand celestial architecture with us at its heart. It created a universe that was a home, not a vast, empty wilderness. We all know the story of how this model was overthrown. In 1543, Nicolaus Copernicus published on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, proposing that the sun was at the center. It took another century and a half, and the work of Kepler, Galileo, and Newton for the heliocentric model to be fully accepted. And in the process, our place in the universe changed forever. We were no longer at the center. We were on a small planet, orbiting a medium-sized star, in a forgotten corner of an ordinary galaxy, in a universe of billions of galaxies. The universe was no longer a cozy home. It was a vast, cold, and indifferent expanse. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me." We gained scientific accuracy, but we lost our sense of cosmic importance. Or did we? Physics now tells us that because of the relativity of motion, there is no privileged, absolute center to the universe. Any point can be considered the center of its own observable universe, and the anthropic principle asks a profound question: if the universe is so vast and random, why do the fundamental constants of physics seem so perfectly fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Is our existence in some way central to the meaning of the cosmos, even if we aren't at its physical center? Have we just traded a physical center for a quantum and philosophical one? Number 14, what was the great chain of being? How do you organize the world? We use biology, we have kingdoms, phyla, classes, orders, families. It's a system based on evolutionary relationships. The medieval world had a different system. It was simpler, more elegant, and profoundly spiritual. They called it the great chain of being. This was the idea that every single thing in the universe, from God down to the lowest speck of dust, had its place in a continuous, unbroken hierarchy. It was a ladder of existence. At the very top was God, who was pure being. Just below him were the different ranks of angels. Then came humanity, unique because we were a bridge between the spiritual world of the angels and the physical world of the animals. Below us were the animals, ranked by their perceived intelligence and nobility lions above worms. Below them were the plants, also ranked the oak above the weed. Below them were the minerals and metals, gold above lead. And at the very bottom was nothingness, the complete absence of being. This concept, with roots in Aristotle and Neoplatonism, became the bedrock of the medieval worldview. Everything had its place, and every place was necessary. A worm was not an accident, it was a necessary link in the chain. A king was above a peasant, a lion was above a sheep, an angel was above a human. This was the natural, God-given order of things. To try to rise above your station was an act of pride, a sin against the cosmic order. The 16th century writer Sir Thomas Elyot described it in the book named The Governor in the State of Mortality. He hath made an order of degrees, some are in high degree, some in low. The entire universe was a single, perfectly ordered society. The beauty of the great chain of being is the sense of radical inclusion and purpose it provides. Nothing is random, nothing is meaningless, everything, no matter how humble, has a crucial role to play in the divine tapestry of creation. It connects the stone to the plant to the animal to the human to the angel, and the angel to God in one single continuous flow of existence. It means that the universe is not a collection of separate objects, but a single unified whole, a body where every cell has its function. It gives a sense of stability, order, and deep-seated meaning to the world. The scientific revolution, especially the discovery of evolution by Charles Darwin in the 19th century, shattered this chain. Darwin's theory showed that life was not a static ladder, but a branching tree. The species were not fixed in their places. They changed, they appeared, and they went extinct. There was no higher or lower, just different adaptations for survival. Humanity was not a special creation halfway to the angels, but just another branch on the great tree of life, an ape that got lucky. We lost the comforting certainty of a fixed place and a fixed order, but has the idea of a hierarchy really gone away? We still talk about higher and lower life forms, even if biologists tell us not to. We talk about food chains and ecosystems, which are complex, hierarchical systems of energy flow. And what about consciousness? Is it possible that there is a kind of hierarchy of consciousness, from the simple awareness of a plant, to the instinct of an insect, to the emotional intelligence of a mammal, to the self-aware, abstract thought of a human? Are there forms of consciousness beyond our own that we cannot yet imagine? Is the great chain of being not a chain of physical forms, but a spectrum of awareness that runs through the entire universe? Of number 13, was the world a book written by God? We think of books as things made of paper and ink. But in the medieval world, they believed there were two great books of revelation. One was the Bible, the Liber Scriptus, the written book. The other was the universe itself, the Liber Mundi, the book of the world. The idea was that nature was a second scripture. God had written his truths not only in Hebrew and Greek, but also in the language of mountains, stars, animals, and plants. To study nature was a form of worship, a way of reading God's other book. The 12th century theologian Hugh of St. Victor wrote, "For the whole sensible world is like a book written by the finger of God." Every creature, every object was a word, a symbol, a metaphor, pointing to a deeper spiritual reality. This belief transformed the act of seeing. When a medieval person looked at a lion, they didn't just see a large cat. They saw a symbol of courage, of royalty, and of Christ, the Lion of Judah. When they saw a lily, they didn't just see a flower, they saw a symbol of purity and the Virgin Mary. The world was saturated with meaning. It was a forest of symbols. The Irish theologian John Scotus Eriugena in the 9th century called creation a theophany, a manifestation of God. The entire universe was a kind of divine poem, and the job of the wise person was to learn how to read it. This is a profoundly beautiful way to see the world. It means that reality is not just a collection of physical facts. It is a story, it has a plot, characters, and a moral. It encourages a kind of double vision, where you see the physical object and its spiritual meaning at the same time. It makes the world a place of constant revelation and wonder. It insists that the most important thing about the world is not what it is made of, but what it means. The natural world was not something to be exploited, but something to be interpreted. It was a sacred text that deserved reverence and careful study. The rise of modern science, starting in the 17th century, explicitly rejected this view. Francis Bacon, one of the fathers of the scientific method, argued that we should stop looking for symbols and start looking for causes. We should study how the world works, not what it means. Science chose to read the book of nature in the language of mathematics, not the language of metaphor. We gained a powerful ability to predict and control the natural world, but we lost the ability to read it for its meaning. We learned the grammar, but forgot the story. But is the story really gone? When a physicist describes the universe as elegant, or a biologist speaks of the beauty of a cellular process, are they not responding to a kind of meaning, a kind of narrative structure in the world? The genetic code, DNA, is literally a text written in a 4-letter chemical alphabet that contains the instructions for building a living organism. Are we not, in our own way, just learning a new language in which the book of nature is written? And could the patterns we see in the cosmos, the spiral of a galaxy mirroring the spiral of a shell, be a kind of rhyme, a hint that the universe is, after all, a poem? Number 12, did every element have a spirit? We think of the elements as the 118 entries on the periodic table. They are defined by the number of protons in their nucleus. But for thousands of years, people thought there were only 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. And they weren't just dead physical substances. They were living principles, each with its own character, and sometimes its own spirit. This system came from the ancient Greeks, particularly Empedocles, and Aristotle. They believed that everything in the world was made from a combination of these four elements. But it was more than just a physical theory. Each element was associated with qualities. The earth was cold and dry, water was cold and wet, air was hot and wet, fire was hot and dry. These qualities also corresponded to the four humors in the human body: black bile, phlegm, blood, and yellow bile, which were believed to determine a person's health and temperament. A balanced person had their humors, and thus the elements, in balance. During the Renaissance, this idea was elaborated on by thinkers like Paracelsus, who proposed that each element was inhabited by a specific type of nature spirit. These were not angels or demons, but elemental beings. The earth was inhabited by gnomes, small, wizened creatures who guarded underground treasures. Water was the home of undines, or nymphs, who were beautiful and fluid. The air was filled with sylphs, winged, fairy-like beings. And fire was the domain of salamanders, lizard-like creatures who could live in flames. These beings were the souls of the elements, the living intelligence that guided their behavior. The beauty of this belief is that it populates the world with life and consciousness, right down to its most basic components. The world is not made of dead matter. The ground you walk on, the water you drink, the air you breathe, the fire that warms you, they are all alive. The rustling of leaves in the wind could be the passing of a sylph. The glint of light on a stream could be an undine. A strange rock formation could be the work of gnomes. It turns the natural world into a magical, inhabited kingdom. It makes nature a society, not a resource. It encourages a relationship with the elements based on respect, because you are dealing with living beings, not just chemical substances. This science, of course, has shown us the atomic and subatomic world. We know that fire is a chemical reaction, not a home for lizards. We know that water is H2O, not the domain of nymphs. But have we lost the poetry? We talk about the power of the ocean, the fury of a storm, the gentleness of a breeze. We use these personifications all the time. Is this just a linguistic habit, or does it reflect a deep, intuitive understanding that these forces have a kind of character, a kind of agency? Ecologists talk about ecosystems as complex, self-regulating systems that behave almost like a single organism. Could this be a modern scientific way of saying that the earth, the water, and the air are, in a very real sense, alive? Are we just rediscovering the soul of the elements in the language of systems theory? Number 11. Could the stars control your destiny? We check the weather forecasts, they check their horoscopes. For the medieval world, astrology was not a fringe superstition. It was a serious science. They believed that the positions of the planets and stars at the moment of your birth had a profound influence on your character, your health, and your fate. The system was incredibly complex, inherited from the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks, and refined by Arab and Jewish scholars. Each planet, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, was believed to have its own character. Mars was warlike, Venus was loving, Jupiter was jovial, Saturn was melancholic. These planets radiated influences or forces that shaped the world below. The sky was divided into the 12 houses of the zodiac, and the position of the planets in these houses at the time of a person's birth determined their personal makeup. It was a form of cosmic psychology. It was used for everything. Doctors would consult star charts to determine the best time to perform surgery or administer medicine, as described in medical treatises like the 11th century Trottoir. Kings and generals would not make a major decision without consulting their court astrologer. The great 13th century scientist Roger Bacon called astrology the mistress of all sciences. Even a theologian as important as Thomas Aquinas argued that the stars could influence our bodies and our passions, though he insisted that our free will, our soul, could ultimately overcome these influences. The planets were part of God's machinery for governing the physical world. This belief is beautiful because it creates a profound and intimate connection between the individual human life and the grand movements of the cosmos. Your personal story is not a small, isolated event. It is written in the stars. Your birth was not an accident. It was a moment when the entire celestial clock was aligned in a unique way, stamping you with a cosmic signature. It means that the universe is not indifferent to you. It is deeply, personally involved in your life. It gives a sense of destiny, of being part of a larger cosmic drama. The Enlightenment dismissed astrology as pure superstition. We know now that the planets are just balls of rock and gas, and their gravitational or electromagnetic influence on us is negligible. The constellations are just random patterns of distant stars that have no real connection to each other. But has the underlying desire for this connection gone away? Millions of people still read their horoscopes every day. We talk about being mercurial or Saturnian. The language of astrology is still embedded in our culture. And what about the very real scientific influences of celestial bodies? The moon controls the tides. The sun cycles affect our climate and our moods. We are now discovering that cosmic rays from distant supernovae can affect cloud formation and may have influenced evolution. Are we just at the beginning of understanding the subtle ways in which the cosmos truly does shape our lives? Is astrology a forgotten poem about a truth we are only now starting to rediscover through science? Number 10 was a swamp, a place of evil. We see a swamp or a bog as a type of wetland ecosystem, a place with a specific kind of soil, water level, and plant life. For the medieval mind, it was something more. It was a place of moral and spiritual danger. In the medieval imagination, the world was not just a physical landscape, it was a moral landscape. And certain places were inherently good or evil. Mountains were often seen as holy places, closer to God. Forests were ambiguous, places of testing and enchantment, but swamps, fens, and bogs were almost universally seen as evil. They were wastelands, places where the normal order of nature broke down. The ground was not solid. The water was not clean. It was a place of decay, disease, and death. In the Old English epic Beowulf, the monster Grendel lives in a misty, murky fen. It is his natural home, a physical manifestation of his evil nature. The landscape itself is a reflection of its inhabitants. This wasn't just literary. People believed these places were genuinely haunted. They were home to will-o'-the-wisps, strange lights that would lure travelers off the path to their doom. These lights, which we now know are caused by the combustion of marsh gas methane, were seen as the souls of the damned or malevolent fairies. Swamps were thought to be entrances to the underworld or places where demons could easily cross into our world. The air itself was considered bad air or malaria, which they correctly associated with the fevers that were common in such areas, though they didn't know it was carried by mosquitoes. The physical danger of the place, getting lost, drowning in quicksand, catching a fever was inseparable from its spiritual danger. The beauty in this belief, dark as it is, lies in its recognition that landscapes have a powerful psychological and spiritual effect on us. It acknowledges that some places feel wrong, oppressive, or threatening. It gives a name and a story to that feeling. It externalizes an internal landscape of fear and anxiety onto the physical world. It meant that navigating the world was not just a physical task, but a moral and spiritual one. You had to be careful where you went, not just because you might trip and fall, but because you might wander into a place of spiritual corruption. We have drained the swamps, we have mapped the bogs, we know about methane and bacteria and viruses. But we still talk about places having a creepy feeling. We are still drawn to stories of haunted houses and cursed forests. The genre of folk horror, which has seen a huge resurgence in recent years, is built entirely on this idea of bad places. What are we sensing in these moments? Are we just picking up on subtle environmental cues, low-frequency sounds, strange smells, a lack of wildlife that our conscious mind doesn't register? Or is it possible that places can hold a kind of memory, an emotional residue of the events that happened there, as some theories of place memory suggest? What do we still not understand about the deep connection between our minds and the landscapes we inhabit? Or number 9, did the beaver bite off its own testicles? Medieval bestiaries are filled with strange stories about animals, but one of the most bizarre is the story of the beaver. It was a story of incredible self-sacrifice. According to the legend, which goes all the way back to Aesop's fables and was repeated by Pliny the Elder, the beaver was hunted for its testicles. The substance they contained, castoreum, was highly valued as a medicine, used to treat headaches, fever, and hysteria. The beaver, being an intelligent animal, knew why the hunters were after it. So, when it was being pursued and could not escape, it would bite off its own testicles and throw them to the hunter. The hunter, having gotten what he wanted, would then leave the beaver alone. The story often had a second part. If a beaver that had already done this was hunted again, it would simply stand up on its hind legs and show the hunter that it no longer had what he was looking for. This story appeared in virtually every medieval bestiary, including the famous Aberdeen bestiary. And like all bestiary stories, it had a clear moral and allegorical meaning. The beaver represents the good Christian. The hunter is the devil. The beaver's testicles are our sins and vices, the things that the devil hunts us for. To be saved, the Christian must castrate himself of his sins, throwing them away and dedicating his life to God. If the devil comes again, the pure Christian can show him that he has nothing left for the devil to take. It was a graphic and memorable lesson in renunciation. Of course, the biology is completely wrong. Beavers do not bite off their own testicles. In fact, their testicles are internal, so they couldn't even if they wanted to. The valuable substance, castoreum, actually comes from scent glands near the anus, not the testes. The story was pure fiction, but the beauty of it lies in the willingness to see a complex moral drama in the animal kingdom. It credits the beaver with intelligence, self-awareness, and an incredible capacity for strategic sacrifice. It imagines a world where animals are not just instinct-driven machines, but moral agents who can teach us profound lessons about how to live. It elevates the beaver from a simple rodent to a teacher of spiritual wisdom. We know the real biology of the beaver. We admire it for its engineering skills, its ability to build dams, and transform landscapes. We see it as a keystone species, crucial to its ecosystem. In a way, we have simply replaced one kind of admiration with another. But we have lost the moral dimension. We no longer look to animals to teach us how to be better people. Or do we? We talk about the loyalty of a dog, the wisdom of an owl, the freedom of an eagle. We still project our own values and aspirations onto animals. Why do we feel such a strong emotional connection to certain animals? What is it about our shared evolutionary history that makes the animal world such a powerful mirror for the human soul? On number 8, did the world have 4 corners? We know the Earth is a sphere, but for centuries, many people pictured it as a flat square or rectangle anchored by 4 corners. This wasn't necessarily a belief held by educated scholars by the High Middle Ages. Most scholars knew the Earth was a globe, but it was a powerful and common image in popular culture, art, and theology. The idea came from a literal interpretation of biblical phrases. The book of Isaiah speaks of God gathering the dispersed of Israel from the 4 corners of the earth. The book of Revelation describes 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds. For many, these were not just metaphors, they were descriptions of the world's actual structure. The world was God's footstool, a solid, stable foundation. The 4 corners corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, and sometimes to the 4 seasons or the 4 elements. It was a vision of a world that was ordered, symmetrical, and bounded. This idea was visualized in a popular type of medieval map called a TO map. These maps showed the world as a flat circle, the O. Inside the circle, the land was divided by a T shape formed by the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River, and the Don River. The 3 continents they knew, Asia, Europe, and Africa, were arranged in these 3 sections. At the very center was Jerusalem, the spiritual center of the world. At the top was East, where the Garden of Eden was thought to lie. This was a map of theology, not geography. It showed the world's spiritual structure, not its physical layout. The beauty of this belief is in its simplicity and its sense of order. It creates a world that is understandable and secure. The world has edges. It has a center. It has a clear structure. It is not an infinite spinning ball lost in an infinite void. It is a stable, divinely designed stage for human life. The image of the 4 angels at the 4 corners holding back the winds is particularly powerful. It suggests that the world is constantly protected by divine power from the forces of chaos that lie just beyond its borders. It is a vision of a world that is cared for and kept safe. The age of exploration from the 15th century onwards proved this model of the world was wrong. The voyages of Columbus, Magellan, and others showed that the Earth was a sphere and that you could sail all the way around it. The world was not a bounded square, but a globe without edges. We gained a more accurate map, but we lost that sense of a contained and protected world. But has the idea of 4 corners really disappeared? We still use the phrase to the 4 corners of the earth to mean everywhere. We still orient our buildings and our cities to the 4 cardinal directions. We still feel a deep psychological need for centers and boundaries to make sense of our world. And in physics, the search for a theory of everything is a search for the fundamental ordering principles of the universe. Are we still, in our own way, trying to find the four corners of reality? Number 7 was a magnet, a magic stone. To us, a magnet is a physical object with a magnetic field caused by the alignment of electron spins in its atoms. It's a matter of physics. To the medieval world, a magnet, or lodestone, was a stone with a soul. It was a piece of magic. The properties of the lodestone were known since antiquity. Pliny the Elder wrote about it, amazed that a simple stone could attract iron. But in the medieval period, it became the subject of intense fascination and speculation. The 13th century French scholar Peter of Méricourt wrote one of the first detailed studies of magnetism, the Epistola de Magneti. He did real experiments identifying the north and south poles of a magnet and describing how they attract and repel each other. But his explanation was not one of physics. He believed the magnet was infused with a celestial virtue. It pointed north, not because of the Earth's magnetic field, but because it was aligning itself with the celestial pole, the axis around which the entire universe turned. The stone had a desire, a love, for the heavens. The magnet was also believed to have other, more magical powers. It was thought to be able to cure diseases, reconcile married couples, and even detect infidelity. The writer John Gower, in the 14th century, claimed that if a magnet was placed under the pillow of a sleeping wife, she would fall out of bed if she had been unfaithful. Other stories claimed that a magnet could lose its power if it came into contact with a diamond or was smeared with garlic. These beliefs were part of a wider worldview that saw sympathies and antipathies running through all of nature. The magnet's love for iron and the heavens was just one example of the hidden relationships that connected everything. The beauty of this belief is that it sees the forces of nature not as impersonal laws, but as living relationships. The world is full of attractions, repulsions, loves, and hates. Magnetism is not a cold, abstract force. It is a form of desire. The stone is not a dead object. It has a kind of soul, a connection to the cosmos. This worldview makes nature dramatic and personal. To understand the world is to understand its secret loves and enmities. It is to see the universe as a web of relationships, not a collection of objects. We now understand electromagnetism, one of the four fundamental forces of nature. We have harnessed it to create everything from electric motors to computer hard drives, but the mystery has not entirely vanished. We still don't fully understand the Earth's magnetic field, how it is generated, or why it periodically reverses its polarity. We know that birds and other animals can sense this field and use it to navigate. How do they do this? What is the biological mechanism? Is there a kind of sixth sense for magnetism that we have lost? And when we talk about personal magnetism or the attraction between two people, are we just using a metaphor, or are we speaking to a deeper truth about the invisible forces that draw things together? Number 6, could you turn lead into gold? Alchemy. The word conjures up images of secret laboratories, bubbling potions, and old wizards trying to create gold. For many, it is the ultimate symbol of medieval foolishness, but for those who practice it, alchemy was not about getting rich quick. It was a spiritual and philosophical quest, and the transformation of lead into gold was just its most famous symbol. The theory behind alchemy was based on the Aristotelian idea that all matter was composed of the 4 elements. But alchemists believed that underlying these elements was a single primal substance, the prima materia. All the different metals, lead, tin, copper, silver, were just different forms of this one substance in different states of purity and maturity. And lead was an impure, sick metal. Gold was the most pure, perfect, and healthy metal. The goal of the alchemist was to find a substance, the philosopher's stone, that could act as a catalyst to purify the base metals and bring them to their state of perfection gold. This process, called the Great Work, was not just a chemical one. It was a mirror of a spiritual process. The alchemist believed that as he worked to purify the metals in his laboratory, he was also purifying his own soul. The prima materia was not just a physical substance, it was the chaos of the unredeemed soul. The lead was the alchemist's own sinful mortal state. The philosopher's stone was divine grace or enlightenment. And the gold was the perfected immortal soul, united with God. Famous alchemical texts like the Mutus Liber silent book from the 17th century consist only of images showing the parallel work of the laboratory and the spirit. The goal was not just to make gold, but to become gold. The beauty of alchemy lies in this perfect fusion of the physical and the spiritual. It refuses to separate the world of matter from the world of the soul. It insists that what you do to the world, you also do to yourself. It is a path of transformation where science and mysticism are one and the same. The laboratory is an altar. The experiment is a prayer. It is a belief that the universe and everything in it is on a journey towards perfection, and that we can participate in that sacred process. Modern chemistry was born from alchemy. Early scientists like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton were both dedicated alchemists. They kept the experimental methods but threw away the spiritual philosophy. We learned how to change one substance into another through chemical reactions. In the 20th century, with the discovery of nuclear physics, we even learned how to transmute elements. We can, in particle accelerators, turn lead into gold, though it costs far more to do than the resulting gold is worth. We have achieved the physical goal of alchemy, but have we lost its soul? What if the alchemists were right in a deeper sense? What is the relationship between our inner psychological state and the outer physical world? The field of psychoneuroimmunology is now showing the powerful effects that our thoughts and emotions can have on our physical health. Are we just beginning to scientifically rediscover the alchemical truth that the mind and the body, the spirit and the matter, are inseparably linked? Number 5. Did a mandrake scream when you pulled it up? Of all the magical plants in the medieval world, none was more famous or more feared than the mandrake. It was a real plant, Mandragora officinarum, native to the Mediterranean, but the legends that grew up around it were extraordinary. The most famous belief was about its root. The mandrake root is often forked and vaguely resembles a human figure. This, according to the Doctrine of Signatures, meant it was a powerful plant closely connected to humanity. The legend was that when the plant was pulled from the ground, it would let out a terrifying, life-shattering scream. Anyone who heard this scream would instantly die or be driven mad. This belief is mentioned in many texts, including, famously, in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet fears waking in the tomb with loathsome smells, and shrieks like mandrakes torn out of the earth, that living mortals, hearing them, run mad. Because of this danger, harvesting a mandrake required a complex ritual. The 11th century Anglo-Saxon herbal manual describes how you must use an ivory staff to trace a circle around the plant, being careful not to touch it. Then, at sunset, you must tie a rope from the plant's root to the neck of a hungry black dog. You then place food just out of the dog's reach. As the dog lunges for the food, it will pull the mandrake out of the ground. The dog will hear the scream and die, but the harvester, standing at a safe distance with his ears plugged with wax, will get the precious root unharmed. The root was then used for many purposes as a powerful anesthetic and aphrodisiac, and in magical rituals to bring wealth or fertility. This is a beautiful belief because it imbues the plant world with a terrifying power and consciousness. It suggests that plants are not passive, silent things. They have a life, a voice, and a spirit that is fiercely protective of itself. To take a life from the earth, even a plant's life, is a dangerous and significant act. It requires ritual, sacrifice the dog, and respect. It turns the simple act of gathering herbs into a high-stakes encounter with the sacred and dangerous forces of nature. It is a world away from our modern view of plants as biological resources to be harvested mechanically. The belief is, of course, false. Mandrake roots do not scream, but recent scientific research is revealing that plants are far more active and communicative than we ever imagined. We now know that plants communicate with each other through chemical signals sent through the air and through the wood wide web of fungal networks in the soil. They can warn each other of insect attacks, they can share nutrients. Some studies have even shown that plants can make ultrasonic clicking sounds when they are under stress, from dehydration or having their stems cut. It's not an audible scream, but it is a kind of voice. Are we just now developing the technology to hear what the medieval world could only imagine? What other secrets of the plant world are still waiting to be discovered, hidden in the silence we have mistaken for emptiness? Number 4, were dragons real? For us, dragons are creatures of fantasy, the stuff of books and movies. For the medieval world, they were real. They were a part of the natural zoology of the world, just like lions or bears, only more rare and more dangerous. They were described in bestiaries and natural histories. The 12th century Aberdeen Bestiary has a whole section on dragons dracones. It describes them as giant serpents living in Ethiopia and India. They have a crest on their head, a small mouth, and they kill not with their teeth, but with their powerful tail. Their strength is so great that not even an elephant is safe from them. The dragon will lie in wait by a path where elephants walk, then coil its tail around the elephant's legs, trip it, and suffocate it. The dragon's breath and blood were often said to be poisonous. These were not fire-breathing, winged monsters of high fantasy. They were more like giant, deadly snakes, but they were also powerful symbols. The dragon was almost always a symbol of Satan, of evil, and of paganism. The stories of saints, like the famous legend of Saint George and the dragon, were allegories for the triumph of Christian faith over evil. The saint doesn't just kill an animal, he slays the devil himself and brings a community to salvation. The dragon was a real creature, but it was also a living embodiment of the forces of cosmic evil. The belief in dragons was supported by physical evidence. The discovery of dinosaur fossils, giant bones, and skulls was easily interpreted as the remains of dragons. The 14th century writer Sir John Mandeville, in his popular and largely fictional travels, claimed to have seen dragons himself in the East. People believed in them because they fit into their worldview, and there was what seemed to be evidence for their existence. The beauty of the belief in dragons is that it makes the world a more heroic place. It means there is real, tangible evil in the world to be fought. There are monsters to be slain. It gives a physical form to our deepest fears and a heroic narrative to our struggles against them. It makes the world a place of high adventure and moral clarity. A world with dragons is a world where courage and faith have a real physical battle to win. We have mapped the world. There are no dragons in it. We have pushed our monsters into the realms of psychology and sociology. Our dragons are now our inner demons or systemic injustices. But have we really lost the dragon? The search for creatures like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot is a modern-day dragon hunt. And what about the enduring power of the dragon archetype in our stories? From Smaug in The Hobbit to the dragons in Game of Thrones, we are still captivated by them. Why? Does the dragon represent a kind of deep archetypal memory of a time when our small human ancestors had to contend with giant predators? The paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould wondered if the cross-cultural myths of dragons might be a kind of racial memory of dinosaurs passed down through millennia. Or does the dragon simply represent the untamed, powerful, and dangerous aspects of nature itself, a force that we still, in our hearts, both fear and respect? Number 3. Was there a paradise on Earth? We think of paradise, or the Garden of Eden, as a place from the distant, mythical past. There's a story from the first pages of the Bible, but for many in the medieval world, it was a real physical place that still existed somewhere on Earth. You just had to find it. Medieval maps like the Hereford Mappa Mundi from around 1300 often show the Garden of Eden. It's usually located at the farthest eastern edge of the world, in Asia. It was depicted as a beautiful, walled garden from which 4 great rivers flowed out to water the world: the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Pishon, and the Gihon. It was believed to be on a high mountain, so high that it was untouched by Noah's flood. It was the source of all the world's beauty and fertility. The belief that Eden was a real, physical place inspired actual voyages of exploration. The legendary Letter of Prester John, a fictional text that circulated in Europe from the 12th century, described a fantastical Christian kingdom in the East that was said to be near the earthly paradise. This helped fuel a desire to explore the East, not just for trade, but for spiritual discovery. Even Christopher Columbus, on his 3rd voyage in 1498, thought he had found the location of the earthly paradise. He saw the fresh water of the Orinoco River Delta flowing far out into the Atlantic Ocean and concluded that such a powerful river must have its source in the Garden of Eden. He wrote in his journal that he believed the paradise was on a nipple-shaped mountain in what is now Venezuela. This is a beautiful belief because it makes the world a place of ultimate hope. It means that perfection is not just a dream for the afterlife. A piece of it, a remnant of the world as it was meant to be, still exists. The world is not entirely fallen. Somewhere, there is a place of perfect peace, beauty, and harmony with God. The world is not a prison, it is a pilgrimage, and the goal might just be a real place you can reach at the end of the journey. It filled the map with a sacred destination, a point of ultimate meaning and desire. The age of exploration eventually mapped the entire globe, and there was no Garden of Eden to be found. The belief slowly faded, and paradise retreated from the physical world into the realm of the purely spiritual. We gained a complete map, but we lost our ultimate destination on it. But has the search for an earthly paradise really ended? What is the modern environmental movement but a search for a way to restore the earth to a kind of pristine, Edenic state. What are our national parks, if not attempts to preserve little pieces of paradise from the fallen world of industrial civilization? And when we seek out places of incredible natural beauty for our vacations, are we not, in our own secular way, still searching for that place of perfect peace, that garden at the edge of the world? Number two, did the sun dance on Easter morning? Every year, on Easter Sunday, a tradition still practiced in some parts of the world, especially in Ireland and the UK, involves people getting up before dawn and climbing a hill to watch the sunrise. They are watching for a miracle. They are watching to see the sun dance. This is an old folk belief, rooted in the medieval period. The legend says that on the morning of Christ's resurrection, the sun itself danced for joy in the sky as it rose. It was said to spin, to leap, to change colors, and to throw out brilliant rays of light. This was not a metaphor. People believed it was a real physical event that happened every Easter morning. The 17th century English writer Sir John Suckling wrote in a ballad, "But oh, she dances such a way, no sun upon an Easter day is half so fine a sight." This belief was a way of seeing the central event of the Christian faith reflected in the grandest and most powerful object in the natural world. The resurrection of Jesus was not just a historical event that happened to one person. It was a cosmic event of such magnitude that the entire universe responded. The sun, the source of all light and life on earth, literally rejoiced. It was a physical confirmation of a spiritual truth. It meant that nature was not indifferent to human affairs. It was an active participant in the divine drama. The beauty of this belief is its sheer, unadulterated joy. It takes the daily, predictable event of the sunrise and transforms it, for one day a year, into a miraculous celebration. It encourages people to get up, to go outside, to watch the sky with a sense of anticipation and wonder. It connects a profound religious mystery with a direct personal experience of the natural world. It is a belief that insists the universe is fundamentally joyful, that it is capable of celebrating the triumph of life over death. Science, of course, tells us the sun does not dance. It is a massive ball of hot gas, and its rising is just a result of the Earth's rotation. Any perceived dancing is just an optical illusion caused by atmospheric conditions, shimmering air currents, or the effect of staring at a bright light. But to explain it away is to miss the point. The belief is not about astronomy, it's about meaning. What have we lost by insisting on a purely literal physical explanation for everything? We still speak of a glorious sunrise. We still feel a sense of awe and renewal when we watch it. Is this just an aesthetic response, or is it an echo of that older belief, the feeling that we are witnessing not just a physical event, but a moment of cosmic significance? What if joy is not just a human emotion, but a fundamental property of the universe, and a sunrise is one of the ways it is expressed? Number one, was everything alive? If you take all these beliefs together, the growing stones, the world soul, the moral animals, the singing stars, the living elements, the communicative plants, they all point to one single overarching idea. It is the most beautiful and the most alien of all medieval beliefs about nature. It is the belief that everything was, in some sense, alive. This wasn't pantheism, the idea that everything is God. It was more subtle than that. It was a worldview that did not make a hard, clear distinction between the living and the non-living, the mind and the matter, the spirit and the substance. The universe was not a collection of dead objects governed by impersonal laws. It was a living, breathing, ensouled cosmos, a vast hierarchy of beings, each with its own nature, its own purpose, and its own spark of life. The philosopher and historian of science, E.M.W. Tilliard, in his classic book, The Elizabethan World Picture, described this as a universe that is a rhythm and a dance. Everything was interconnected, not by the laws of physics, but by a web of sympathies, correspondences, and meanings. This is what the 20th century scholar Owen Barfield called original participation. He argued that for the medieval person, the world was not an objective thing to be observed from the outside. The world was a thou, a being to be in relationship with. There was no sharp division between the inner world of the human mind and the outer world of nature. They participated in each other, the world was alive and intelligent, and so were you. To think was to participate in the thinking of the universe. This is perhaps the most beautiful idea we have lost. We gain the power that comes from seeing the world as a machine, a collection of resources to be analyzed and manipulated. But we lost the sense of kinship that comes from seeing the world as a fellow being. We live in a world that our science tells us is, for the most part, dead. A universe of lifeless rocks, empty space, and mindless physical processes. Life is a rare, accidental exception. For them, life was the norm. The universe was saturated with it. We have paid a high price for our disenchantment of the world. A world of dead matter can be exploited without guilt. A world of living beings demands respect. But is our scientific story of a dead universe the final one? The discoveries of quantum physics, which show a bizarre and interconnected reality at the subatomic level, have led some physicists like Freeman Dyson to wonder if mind is not an accident, but a fundamental part of the universe. The new understanding of ecosystems shows that forests and oceans behave like complex, integrated organisms. The philosophers of panpsychism are seriously proposing that consciousness is a fundamental property of all matter. Are we, at the cutting edge of our own science, slowly, hesitantly beginning to rediscover the truth that the medieval world knew all along? What if the universe is not a dead machine we are living in, but a living thought we are thinking? What if everything is, after all, alive?